Hi, I'm going to show you how to make a pollination bag out of Tyvek fabric. If you're watching this video, you probably know what a pollination bag is, but a pollination bag is a bag that's put over plant crosses when you're trying to exclude foreign pollen, and it's removed and you can apply the pollen that you want to make a controlled cross where you know both parents. In this case, I'm using Tyvek house wrap to make my bag. This sheet of Tyvek was 9 feet wide, and I've cut it, in this case it's 18 inches wide. So I wanted to make a Tyvek bag because this material is a very tough material. A little later I'll talk about other types of pollination bags and why I wanted a tougher bag. In this case, I had a design for a bag that I was using previously. It just wasn't tough enough to make bags that could hold up against what I was finding in my vineyard, and I'm doing grape crosses. And so I took that bag, in this case it was a pastry bag, and I just took the seams apart, so I made it flat, and this is what I was going to use as a design for my Tyvek bags. Then I took this and I made a wooden template out of 1/8 inch plywood and cut it around the bag that I was using for my design. In this case, you know, it's a square. This is 17 inches wide by just under 12 inches tall. This commercial bag that I used as my design has a little tab here on the bottom, and when I made my template I cut that into the wood, but that tab is actually unnecessary. It may be there to facilitate machine folding of the commercial bags, or it's the matching to this notch up here, and this notch may just be to allow easier opening in a commercial setting, but it's not needed for a pollination bag, and if I were to make my template again, I would cut straight across on the bottom. In addition to cutting around the edges, there's some slot cuts that are made into the bag. There's 4 slots that are cut in the bottom that facilitate the positions for folding the bottom of the bag, and I'll show you that a little later. But it's important that those slots also get cut in your wood template, and so that they can be made into the Tyvek as you're making it. In addition, there are 2 slots in the top, and those correspond to, this is the side of the bag here, and another side of the bag here. That's called the gusset side of the bag. In the middle of the gusset, I want to cut there will allow my plant to go into, and I'll show you that when I demonstrate how to use the bag a little bit later. But it's important that all these slots be cut into your wooden template. So after I have the wooden template, I'm going to I'm going to cut my Tyvek. I'm going to put down a backer board so I don't cut whatever I have on my surface. In this case, the floor. I don't want to cut the floor, but if you're doing it on a table, you'd also want some kind of backing. So since this is the first piece that I'm cutting out of this Tyvek, there's a straight edge here, and there's a straight edge on the bag here. So I'll just put that edge of the template even with that straight edge of the Tyvek. And then I'm going to take, in this case, a hobby knife, a sharp hobby knife, and I'm going to cut out my Tyvek, piece of Tyvek. Oops. One side there. From this tab, I'm going to go one direction, and then I'll go the other direction. Again, I should probably take the time to cut that tab off this template because it's not something that I actually put into my bags at this point. And then the third side here. I make about 50 of these bags a year for my crosses, and I usually do this during the winter when I have some time on my hands. In this case, I'm actually during the pollination season to show you. And after I've cut the edges, I'm going to take the hobby knife and cut those slots, those 4 slots along the bottom of the bag, and the 2 slots at the top for the gusset cuts. So after everything's worked out right, I should have a piece of Tyvek that's ready for folding. Oh, I have to cut for that tab. I'm going to cut across there with using a straight, make it straight across the bottom there. Okay. have a piece of Tyvek. And before I start folding, I'm just going to make sure that all those slot cuts are cut all the way out to the edges. Sometimes I miss the very end of it. Okay, so this is the outside of the bag, the printed part of the house wrap, and the inside has no printing on it. The edge with the 4 cuts is the bottom of the folded, and this is the top of the bag, or the opening edge of the bag. So the next thing I did was I made a dummy for folding around. In this case, I used some pieces of 2-inch foam, and I cut this exactly the size of the inside of the bag. You'll see in a moment. So to seal the seams on these bags, they make a special tape for taping house wrap, doing the seams when they're actually using it in the construction industry. I have a couple examples here. This is the Tyvek brand. It's a white one. This is just another brand that's in red. I recommend using the house wrap tapes because they hold very well to the Tyvek fabric itself. I have a preference for this white one, but they both work just as well. So I'm going to take a piece of Tyvek tape and cut it approximately a little bit longer than the length of the bag. So there's my piece of tape. And then I also like to, you can use the full width of this tape to tape the seams, but you have to be careful about getting it on there because it can get in the way of some of the folds in the bottom. So to make it so that I don't have to worry so much about position, I'm going to cut lengthwise on the tape. Oops, need to do that. So the first thing I want to do is put a piece of tape on the inside of the seams. I'm going to do that before I fold my bag. Put that right along the edge of the bag so that the sticky part of the tape is pointing up at this point. This is the top or the open edge of the bag, and you want that even with the top edge of your foam dummy. Then your 2 gusset cuts, you want the cut to be in the middle of each side. So here I have a gusset cut that's right in the middle of this side, and the other cut falls in the middle of the opposite side. And then just bring it around the foam dummy so that the top edges of your bag come back and meet each other, and then go down and seam the bag. You can fold off those ends back to the outside. Let's see. So since I destroyed this piece of tape earlier, I'm going to cut another piece of tape here. In this case, I'm going to use it the full width because it can actually, at this point, see exactly where it's going to go. So I'm going to put that down the full width of that. I would have used that split piece of tape if I hadn't accidentally cut it in half earlier. I'm going to cut off this end, and I'm going to cut a little bit extra off this end back down here on the bottom. I'm going to take that extra and fold it back in, seal it onto the inside of the bag. So now this is the bottom of the bag that'll be folded, and you can see that down here, this is even with the edge of the foam, the opening end of the bag. Take the sides of the bag, fold it in, and you can see that those cuts on the bottom make it easy to fold it in just the right position. You can you can fold those seams and make a little crease with your finger, and then just fold in the remaining 2 long side tabs. So that's the bottom folded in, and you want to seal that up with some more of this tape. It's going to take 2 strips of tape to go across the bottom of the bag. You want to have a pretty good seal down there. I'm going to turn it on its end here. Get it in the right position. come across with the first piece of tape. And I like to cut it even with the edges on the bottom strips of tape. And put another one just adjacent to that first. First, perhaps this is the hardest part of making the bag, is keeping my tape coming off in one piece. I have some extra on one end, but it got kind of messed up here. Trim that off. And trim off the other end. Okay, at this point, go along the 4 long corners and kind of put a crease in there so that when you take the foam out, you still have the same shape of the bag, and we're ready to remove the foam from the inside of the bag. Fold this extra on the outside seam onto the inside. The first thing I do now is go and crease those, make a really sharp crease on those seams. You can crease around the edges of the bottom of the bag as well. At this point, we're ready to make those gusset folds. And we essentially have a completed bag at this point. So you can, I'll show you how to put this on a plant. In this case, I have a grape wilting a little bit, but this is a shoot with a flower cluster on it. And you'd take the bag, and on most grapes they have a perfect flower with both male and female parts, and before you would do a cross you would emasculate it, you'd remove the male portion of the flower. Although wild grapes tend to have single sex flowers, so you'd be doing crosses onto a female flower and you wouldn't have to do anything. You just put a bag on it and wait for the caps to fall off and the female parts, the flower to be receptive, and then put the pollen on from your male parent that you've selected. So we put this over the flower cluster, and I usually like to open it up a little bit so that it's the cluster inside is not touching the edge of the bags. And I'd take one fold and 2 folds, and you'll notice that that plant stem is going through those cuts in the gusset. There's a little teeny opening there, but when we seal this, and on this, for that I use a standard stapler. I put one staple at one end of the bag and one down here at the other end of the bag, and it seals it pretty well there. In theory, there's a little opening right here where this goes through, and pollen and insects can potentially get in there. In practice, most breeders find that there's a very low incidence of foreign pollen getting into clusters that are bagged like this. Some people will put little pieces of cotton in there to further seal that, but I've never found that to be necessary. So once the bag is on there and you've protected it so that no foreign pollen can get in there, you'll come back at some point in a couple days. The flowers will be receptive. You'll take the staples out and put some pollen from your chosen male parent on here. And you'll probably actually come back and do that 2 or 3 times on grapes before the female flowers have lost their receptivity. So you're going to be removing these and restapling it. It's possible, I know some people probably use paper clips here. I think it's probably a little less secure with those sliding off, but there's some paper clips that have little teeny cut ribs on them that don't slide off very well, and those would probably be adequate for sealing these, particularly during the stage when you're going to be opening it up and the bag a number of times. As far as staplers, this is a standard office stapler. They make a very small stapler. I found those they don't hold too many staples for one thing, and I found them to be less robust in terms of getting staples through a Tyvek bag. There's the more commercial or industrial plier staplers like a Bostic brand, and those are a very nice stapler if you want to go that route. So once it's on there and you've done the cross, I usually take and write on the bag the female parent, the male parent, and the date that I've done a pollen application. And as I said before, I'll do 2 or 3 pollen applications. And when I've made the last pollen application and I'm done with the cross, I put a check mark next to the date to indicate from the outside that that's a completed cross, and I don't know that I don't have to open it up anymore. Okay, so it's a little bit of work to make a Tyvek pollination bag, and there are other alternative bags that can be used for pollination. I'm going to talk a little bit about those and why I've gone to the trouble of making a Tyvek bag. These Tyvek bags, I've been making them now for 4 years, and some of them I've used 3 times at this point. And I just write them, and generally if I'm going to go and done, this has been used twice, 2 different years, and you can see that the writing, this has been out in the vineyard. One of these has been out there, this one here is the older one, has been out there for 2 years in the vineyard and still is very legible with a industrial permanent Sharpie marker. Generally I would go and just line out the prior years so that I don't get confused, and when I do another cross on here, I'm going to write the new cross down here. So yeah, these can be reused. I suspect that on average it's going to be 3 or 4 years of use before they have to be tossed. They can, over time, they can get a little bit abraded. This has had 2 years of use, and it's got at least another year of use ahead of it. And occasionally you'll get a cluster that gets some gray mold or botrytis rot on it, and they kind of make a mess inside the bag. And that's not unique to a Tyvek bag. That happens in any kind of pollination bag. And if it's been real messy in there, oftentimes I'll toss those bags. It's not worth reusing them. So one thing when you're reusing a bag, obviously this had pollen in it from the year before, but at least in the case of grapes, the viability of pollen is such that by the next time the next year comes around, there's no viable pollen that's left in here from the prior year. So I don't make any effort to clean them out or worry about viable pollen being there from the prior year. It is possible for grape pollen to be viable for that long, but not when it's stored at room temperature. It has to be frozen to be viable a year on. So what other bags could you consider using? You might consider using a plastic bag. Plastic bags don't work very well for pollination bags. They don't hold their shape. They hold a lot of moisture on the inside, and plants are releasing moisture, so you get pools of water in the bottom of a plastic bag. I don't recommend using those at all. You could use a standard, what I call craft lunch bag. There's 2 problems with this. First of all, it's not a waterproof bag. The glue that's used in the seam is not a waterproof glue, so it's oftentimes the seams will split during the season if you use this bag, and just the bag itself will break down in the course of the season, from the rain. And the other thing is when you're writing on this, if you're using this as your label, I find that these will break apart and you just won't be able to read your writing, no matter what kind of marker or crayon you use to write on them. So the standard craft bag is not really something I'm recommending. Sometimes you can go to a hardware store and they'll have a craft bag similar to this for buying things like nails, and it's a heavier duty craft bag. And those are, if you're going to use a standard craft bag, I'd probably go look for the heavier duty bags. Most people, when they do a bag for doing a pollination, are going to leave it on there from the time a pollination is done. In northern Wisconsin, we do pollinations usually in mid to late June, and the grapes are harvested for their seeds in early mid-October. So the bags are covering the grapes during that period. In addition to excluding the pollen when the female flowers are receptive, they're also protecting the grapes from other animals eating them throughout the season. And there doesn't seem to be any problem with the ripening of the fruit inside the bag, or anything particular with diseases developing inside a bag versus exposed clusters. So most breeders are going to leave a bag on from the time they do a pollination to the time they harvest the fruit in the end. So a bag like this just isn't going to hold up during that period. You can use a bag like this to exclude the pollination during the cross season, and then just take this bag off after the fruit is set and you're not worried about pollen being exposed, and people will attach a label to the pedestal or the stem of the cluster. That's a perfectly acceptable way of doing it, but with that you don't have any protection further on in the season from birds or animals eating your cluster. You might be netting it or using some other method to exclude those types of animals. So that's the craft bag. The next thing you might consider is what I would call a bakery bag or a pastry bag. And this is just a waxed bag. It's usually a gusseted bag, so it has the 3 dimensions to it. This is a fine way to both enjoy pastries and to go out to use it for your crosses. Every time you visit a bakery, you can save the bag as long as it's not too dirty on the inside, and use it for your crosses. These wax bags hold up pretty well the paper itself, but again the seam is not a waterproof glue, so sometimes I've had these bags split during the season. And this is a number 4 bakery bag is what we'll call that, and that's a choice you might make. One of my favorite bags, and what I still use and used almost exclusively before I went to using some of these Tyvek bags, is a coffee bag. And this is a 1 pound coffee bag. You often see a bag similar to this in the grocery store where they sell whole bean coffee, that you would either buy the whole beans in the store or grind them and put the ground coffee in the bag. In this case, rather than reusing a bag from my coffee purchases, I use more grape crosses than I do coffee, so that's not really an option for me. But if you are buying coffee and only doing a few crosses, that's certainly reusing the bags that you buy the coffee, and it's certainly a very legitimate way of doing it. But in my case, I buy these. You can buy them. 100 bags cost about $20, so they're 20 cents a piece. I buy them from a place called Coffee Wholesale USA, and in this case, you can either get these bags in a white with or without a window. You can get them in a craft color with or without a window. I like the white bags. The writing tends to hold up longer on the white bag for me than the craft bags. So the reason I've gone to these Tyvek bags is because when I was using these bags, some type of animal was attacking my crosses. They were coming and they were tearing these bags apart. And it didn't really matter whether there was a window in it. You might think that the window was a weak spot. I've never found that. And the windows are quite nice because you look inside there and see the status of your flowers when you're doing a cross, or the status of your fruit set later on. So I kind of like the window bag since I haven't found that a weakness. But something was targeting these and tearing them apart, and they needed a tougher bag. So that's why I went to the Tyvek bag. One really nice thing about these coffee bags is you don't have to use a stapler. You tear it down and you make a gusset. They're easy to tear down and make those gusset slits. And then you just fold this around and use the wire twist tie to seal it. So it's real easy to take it on and off a plant. And I still use these bags quite a bit. You can get, for grapes, the 1 pound bag is good. They come in half-pound bags, and there's a larger one. I think it's a 5 pound bag. But certainly for grapes, this 1 pound coffee bag is a good solution. Now, commercial breeders or industrial breeders use other types of bags. Most of those are aimed at the corn or the maize crosses or sorghum crosses, where there's a large number of bags used, and they can. In this case, this is a Lawson brand called Showerproof, and this is their model 401. Lawson Bag Company makes pollination bags for a long time. They've been making these bags. And this is what's called a tassel bag. It's a craft bag. But in this case, this paper has been treated so that it's waterproof, and the glue that's used in the seam is a waterproof glue. So these never have a problem of coming apart during the season. And again, you can tear down the gussets. I often will actually trim these a little shorter because I don't need this length, which is about 12 inches for a grape cross. Lawson, you used to be able to buy these direct from Lawson, but I'm not even sure at this point in 2014 whether Lawson is still in business. In addition to buying direct from Lawson, there's a company called Seedburo, B-U-R-O, that sells pollination supplies, and they would sell Lawson bags. And recently, I've noticed that Seedburo does not sell Lawson bags anymore. They sell their own brand called Canvasback, and the corresponding model number to the Lawson 401 is the T412 tassel bag that Seedburo sells, and it's essentially the exact same bag. And these come in different sizes, but the 12-inch bag by approximately 4 inches, and it's gusseted, but it's not a flat bottom. But because of the length, it can stay pretty wide open. So it's about 4 inches wide, 4.5 inches wide, about 12 inches long, and a little over 2 inches wide at the gusset point. In addition to Lawson and Seedburo, there's a company called Midco that makes a very similar bag. And that bag might be a glassine paper, but again, it's made to be waterproof. And so I've never tried that bag, but I think it would be another good alternative. So these you have to buy by the box of 1,000, and they run about 50 bucks per 1,000, so about 5 cents a piece. And there's some other alternatives. There's a company in the UK called Pollination Bag Specialists, or PBS International, and they make some very nice bags. At least I've never used them, but by looking on their website, they make a bag. It's not Tyvek, but I think it's a synthetic bag and it has a window, and I think they're pretty pricey, but you might investigate that, particularly if you have some money to spend. But I think they'd be a nice bag. Now, the grapevine itself is a wind-pollinated plant, and it has very small pollen. So we really need a bag that has essentially pores, has no pores. Now, a Tyvek actually is a breathable fabric, which is one of the nice things, is that it doesn't sweat inside. It doesn't promote diseases by having a lot of moisture. And when I open up a Tyvek bag, it's usually pretty dry inside unless it's rained real recently. On plants that are not wind pollinated and have larger pollen and are insect pollinated, in that case, what you're really trying to exclude is insects, and you can get away with using various mesh bags. And I don't have much experience there, but a very small mesh bag could be used on those types of plants, including maybe an organza type bag. Although I don't know whether those organza gift bags will hold up in outside environment. So that's how you make a Tyvek bag and why you would make one. And if you decide to make them, good luck with your breeding. Thanks.